1. Brightside. The oat porridge that morning had been made without milk or sugar. The Wizard of Brightside had warned us this day would come. It would be something to celebrate. It would mean it was time to leave the orphan house for somewhere better, somewhere far away from the acid clouds and city smog of Akeratu that made us cough in the sooty playgrounds. There would be meadows, he said. I didn't know what meadows were. And clear skies and trees with green leaves and shade. He said there would be flowers in the fields like colourful buttons on a carpet. We love buttons here. They are much prized possessions. I couldn't imagine them just strewn carelessly on a carpet, no matter how green. You can use buttons for lots of different games. You can do magic tricks for the small children. You can trade them for sweets. I tried to picture flowers in a meadow. We were surrounded by cold grey concrete, hard metal chairs and thin, dirty mattresses. The building stole the warmth from your blood and made your bones ache, so the idea of lying on soft grass in the sunshine made me long for it deep inside my body as I longed for my parents and Miller Mouse, my little sister. Mouse had cheeks like those crisp pink apples we used to get before the bitter rain ate the blossoms, before the silver drones and the explosions and the smoke. I pushed the acrid-scented memories from my mind and forced my thoughts back to Miller. Her apples for cheeks and naughty smile. Her belly laugh. Her small teeth were perfect, despite her habit of climbing on the kitchen counter and eating sugar out of the dented silver bowl. She would have been 3 years old now. Even the weeds there are pretty, the wizard had said once, his cheeks flushed and his eyes sparkling. And you can blow their seeds. They look like feathers. You can blow them into the breeze and make a wish. But the Wizard of Brightside wasn't always so cheerful. The future is no place for children, he had said the week before. We were in his sparsely furnished office, looking out of the window at the ash falling from the sky like snow. Absent-mindedly, he put his hand on the back of my neck where my barcode was. The past was better. The sky used to be blue, the most beautiful colour you've ever seen, and the grass was soft and green. 2054 is not a good year for children. I didn't know what to think about that. I didn't know what the future was. All I knew was that I once had a home and a family I loved, and now they were gone. Because of this, I had a black emptiness in my stomach which never went away, even on good days. Even when there was plenty of milk and sugar and the nurses would sneak us extra biscuits at tea time. I knew things could be worse. I had heard the whispers. At least at the orphan house, I had a bed to sleep in and food to eat. And I had the wizard, whose tender palm was still resting on my neck. My eyes travelled down the windowsill, and I saw the silver envelope there. It had the Sheng insignia on it, and the top of the paper was jagged where the envelope had been slit open. His hand tensed on my neck, and my muscles stiffened along with it. I was never afraid of him. He was a kind and generous man, and if he had a temper, we had never once witnessed it. He forbade the nurses to spank us or hurt us in any way. But I was scared of what he might say about the official-looking silver letter. I wanted to know what was inside, but I was also afraid. I dragged my eyes from the envelope and gazed up at him. His face looked like one of those charcoal clouds that thundered in and threatened to pelt us with hot shocks and searing rain. He sighed, then forced an affectionate smile. "But things will get better, Kitsune," he said, and I nodded. I liked it when he said my name. It made me feel important. And I knew the line from the book. I knew every line in the book. "Things will get better," it said on page 28, the one most smudged by small fingerprints. They always do. The Wizard of Brightside was not a real wizard, but we liked to call him that, and I think he liked it too. He wasn't like a white bearded man in a fairy tale. but he was magical in his own way. Before he built the orphan house, he had worked as a doctor in a children's hospital where he wrote books to cheer his young patients up. The nurses told us that his most popular book, The Wizard of Brightside, where he got his nickname from, sold thousands of copies, and that he was famous, even in some parts of Sheng, where he was born. He received a medal of some kind from the mayor in the Akeratu City Hall days before the building was razed by the silver drone bombers. Akeratu is in the east, and Sheng is in the west. We don't have a wall to divide us, but a greasy black river called the Fiume. They say it used to be clear water, sweet enough to drink, but now it runs with ash and blood. I don't know where the ash comes from. The Wizard of Brightside was a story about a poor boy who discovers he has supernatural powers and has to learn how to believe in himself and how to control his magic. At the end of the book, he saves the people he loves with a special magic trick. We'd all read the book. Of course we had. We had a few copies to share, but with almost 200 of us, greedy for stories that would make us forget the nagging ghosts that spilt cold mist into our limbs. The pages were brittle and dog-eared, and the curved spines had been sewn and taped over and over. My mum taught me to read when I was 3. She was a journalist and author. We had a lot of books at home, so I know a lot of words, more than some grown-ups do. And I read stories to the tots. We call the 1- and 2-year-olds the tots, and it's our job to look after them. The nurses do too, but there are only 12 of them, and, as they like to remind us, they only have 2 hands. Not like the silver soldiers. But I don't like to think about that. Orphan House is no ordinary orphanage. That's what the wizard says. He says we're all extraordinary, and that's why we wear our badges every day, to remind us that we're important. It's a pale blue diamond-shaped piece of fabric the size of a copper crown. We wear them proudly over our hearts. The wizard doesn't wear one, and neither do the nurses. You can only wear a blue diamond if you're born on the east side of the Fiume, in Akeratu. The people born to the west of the Black River don't wear badges, and they don't have barcodes on their necks. They speak Sheng, the same language as the Silver Soldiers, a language we don't understand. I feel bad for them sometimes. Why can't they be special like us, especially the wizard and the nurses? I thought it would be fairer to get a badge if you were a good person, instead of where you happened to be born. If the authorities knew what they were doing, they'd take Jacko's badge away for bullying the tots and give it to the wizard instead. Jacko pinched the babies and stole their biscuits, which was really mean, because usually we were only allowed 1 cookie a day at tea time. Sometimes the idea of that biscuit is what got you through the day. The day we ran out of milk and sugar, the sky was its usual shade, the colour of a dirty old face cloth frayed from too much boiling and wringing out. And it was raining. We weren't allowed to play in the rain. The acid would sting your skin, and the cold echoed in your skeleton for hours afterwards. There were no more antibiotics, and even the little white pills they used to give us for our fevers were running out. There wasn't enough wood to keep the heat stove burning all day. We used to have heaps of firewood, mountains of it. We'd hunt for branches and kindling in the forest, but we aren't allowed to go into the woods anymore. The black emptiness in my stomach churned the whole day after eating that plain porridge, because I knew things were going to change. I was looking forward to the better place, to the blue skies and clean air. But I also had a bad feeling, like the one I had when the Sheng soldiers came into our house, and my mum told me to hide in the dog kennel. I hadn't wanted to leave her, hadn't wanted to squeeze into the little house that smelled of old dog breath, air abuzz with mosquitoes. Jumpy with nerves, I had begun to argue, but she hissed and shoved me away, tears in her wide eyes. "Remember the plan," her pale lips whispered. So I ran to the kennel and scraped my skin getting inside so that it was raw and bleeding. Sometimes I wished that I'd stayed with Mum there at the kitchen table. Then I wouldn't miss her so much, because I'd be dead too. "Things will get better," said the Wizard of Brightside. "Today we begin our adventure." He instructed us to dress in our finest clothes, our most comfortable shoes, and to take extra care with our morning routine of toothbrushing, face washing, and hair combing. Even though I'm a boy, I'm good at doing the Tots ponytails and braids because I used to do Miller Mouse's hair. Jacko makes fun of me for this, and for wearing my mum's locket around my neck. "Kitsune, Kitsune," he says. "Kitsune's a girl." I don't care. I don't see anything wrong with being a girl. My mum was a girl, and she was the best person I ever knew. "Get lost," I tell him. What I really want to say is, "Go and get lost in the forest." But that would be a terrible thing to say, because everyone knows what happens to children who stray into the woods. When we were all smartly dressed and had gargled with mint tea, mint grew like weeds all around the house, despite the snow ash and sour rain, we were told to pack a knapsack. "Only one change of clothes," the nurses said, "and your favourite toy. And don't forget your lucky buttons." That cheered me up. If we were only taking one outfit and one toy, it surely meant that we would be getting new clothes and books and things to play with. Even my smartest outfit was faded and scruffy, and I was forever trimming loose threads from the seams with the rusty little pocket knife I found under the cracked floorboard in the day room. The navy blue blazer I was wearing was the smartest thing I owned, but it was a size too small. At 14 years old, I was one of the oldest orphans, so there were very few hand-me-downs. The idea of new, comfortable clothes lit a flame of hope inside me. The sound of the rain beating against the roof faded to a hiss, and then to silence. Maybe the wizard was right, I thought, as I straightened my jacket. Maybe things would get better. Knapsacks packed, faces shining, we were ready for our departure. The Tots grasped their cuddle toys to their chests, their pale faces stamped with confusion. They wanted to know where we were going, but no one knew the answer. The meadows meant nothing to them, or us. "Our new home," said Nurse 3, her expression stern. Nurse 3 was usually stern, so that didn't worry me too much. We stood on the warped timber of the front veranda, spilling out down the broad steps that used to be grand, but now peeled back to splintering dry wood. The wizard had his backpack, as did the nurses. The nurses' bags were grey, matching their tunics, but they had left their aprons behind. The wizard took a breath and looked around at us, patting Salome's shoulder and mussing Frederick's hair. It was as if he was breathing in the energy he required for our adventure, even though the air burned your lungs if you drew it in too deeply. I guessed it was difficult to leave the house he had built, the memories he had helped create. Even when you know you're going to a better place, it can still feel sad to leave. The nurses looked upset too, and wore gashes for lips instead of smiles as they herded us down into the front yard of wet sand and soot. At least it had stopped raining. We heard the rumbling of heavy vehicles far in the distance. I had assumed we would have to walk to our new home in the meadows, but it looked like the wizard had arranged transport. It couldn't have been easy. Any fuel was challenging to come by. I was relieved. My shoes were too tight for me, and I could already feel a blister beginning to swell on the back of my heel. I had imagined a trek through the evil forest, tripping over roots, fighting off monsters, and carrying the Tots when they were tired, so I was happy to hear the engines coming our way. But when I saw the 2 trucks approach, splattering black slime and mud, my relief twisted into dread. They weren't school buses. They were cattle trucks armed with silver soldiers. The drivers wore no blue diamonds over their hearts. The robotic Sheng soldiers jumped out, their built-in radial rifles hidden by the shimmering uniform they wore that looked like silver water. My immediate instinct was to run. I remembered my mother's protestations and then her screams until the rat-a-tat-tat of the robot's weapons silenced her. I remembered the feeling that it could not be real, could not possibly be real. But the needle bites of the mosquitoes, like pinching yourself in a dream, made me understand it was. I hadn't wanted to hide. I had wanted to save my mother. But the glint of the silver through the kitchen window paralyzed me. In a way, I was trapped in that moment forever, because in my mind there was no moving past such a heart-shattering thing. I would be squeezed in that musty kennel forever, skin scratched, bleeding and bitten, fright freezing me in place. I suppose a part of me did die with her that day. Seeing the silver soldiers again filled my body with a fiery fear, as if I would burn up right there on the flaking stairs. I could hear the mosquitoes in my ears. Why were they here? Were they not the enemy of Akeratu? Some were robots, some were human, and some were a mix of the two. They shunted the backs of the trucks open with a bang and barked in Sheng. I didn't understand the language, but their meaning was clear. We were to climb in and not waste their time. The nurses held the tots' hands and led them towards the growling vehicles, shushing them and comforting them as they did so. I wanted to run in the opposite direction, wanted to escape the shimmering water uniforms, but I knew I could not. I had been a coward before, frozen in the kennel, but this time I would be brave, like the boy in the book the wizard had written. Instead of running away, I picked up the crying toddler standing next to me and wiped her tears away with the back of my hand. It was Kiki, a sweet toddler I had a soft spot for because of her belly laugh. She reminded me of Mouse. "It's okay," I said to Kiki, moving towards the giant groaning vehicle. "It's okay. You'll see. Things are going to get better for us. Today, our adventure begins." A little boy, Benjamin, refused to get into the truck. So Nurse 9 had to force him inside, and he began to scream and scream, despite the soldiers yelling at him to keep quiet. The roar of the engines drowned out his crying, and I was glad, because I was sure the men wouldn't hesitate to leave him there on the edge of the dark forest, ready to be snatched up by the horrors that lived therein. The dirty brown fabric flaps were down. We didn't get a last look at the orphan house, so we were denied a final glance to say goodbye. It was hot and crowded, and we stood squashed together, 100 children per truck. We took turns to sit when our legs gave way. The vehicle smelled of cow dung, even though I hadn't seen a cow for years. They must still exist, I thought, or we wouldn't have milk for the babies or for our breakfast porridge. The motion of the cattle truck and the stinky broth of exhaust fumes and excrement made my stomach swirl. I held on to Kiki, the tot I had picked up in the front yard, and swayed and patted her, holding her tightly despite my nausea and wobbly legs. The nurses huddled amongst us, and when Benjamin's wailing became unbearable, they began to sing, and we all joined in. We sang hymns and anthems and the theme songs to the television series and adverts we used to watch before the satellites went down. We sang every song we could think of, and Ben stopped sobbing and fell asleep in Nurse 9's arms, his body slack and his head drooping like a spent flower over the woman's shoulder. We played games with our fingers and toes and our buttons. The nurses shared the food they had brought in their backpacks. Stale bread, raisins, and some of the small sour oranges we were able to grow in our makeshift hothouse outside the girls' dormitories. There was not enough water for everyone to have a drink, so I told Nurse 4 that I was not thirsty. The trip lasted for days that were squeezed into hours, infinite minutes that rolled on and on like marbles down a slope. I lost all concept of time and didn't remember sitting down to sleep. When I woke up, Kiki was sitting next to me, singing a nursery rhyme as if it were an ordinary day. Hours after I awoke, exhausted and slick with sweat, the trucks finally stopped. My bladder was so full it was cramping, which I had never felt before. Every time it cramped, I squeezed the large yellow button I kept in my pocket. The button had been a gift from the wizard on my arrival at Orphan House, and I kept it with me at all times. It was my lucky charm, a promise that things would get better. While my bladder sent spasm after spasm through me, the smaller children were not able to hold it. So it was a relief when the rough men finally banged the truck doors open and the fresh wind whipped the reek of urine away. Nurse 3 demanded the soldiers give us water to drink, but the robots fingered their rifles and told her to stand back. I ran to the closest tree and relieved myself behind it, my cheeks alight with shame as I heard the soldiers laughing at me. Again, I had the urge to run, and again, I decided to stay. I felt delirious with hunger and dehydration, and my legs felt strange and heavy on the solid ground after the continuous motion of the vehicle. The sun was too hot. I couldn't face getting into the cattle cars again for the next part of the journey, but I needn't have worried. The giant tires kicked sand in our eyes as the trucks rumbled away, leaving us pale and blinking in the too bright sun. The drivers left. The soldiers stayed. I didn't understand. Where were the meadows? Where was the soft grass and blue skies? I spotted the wizard's tall frame in the crowd, wanting to ask him questions, but he didn't see me. He was too busy tending to the orphans who were weak with distress. All around us was a wasteland. "Even the weeds there are pretty," the wizard had said. But, looking around, I saw that even the weeds were dead. "Congratulations, children," the wizard said, straightening up so that we could all see and hear him. I noticed the strain on his face, and his smile was pulled down at the edges. "You all did an excellent job. Now, the hardest part is over, and we only have good things to look forward to." The atmosphere lightened a little, but I was put off by the smirks I saw on the soldiers' faces, and for the first time I understood that this trip had never been the wizard's idea. We were standing there, ill and hot and shivering because of that silver envelope on the windowsill. The official Sheng letter had been an instruction, not an invitation. "We will now march," said the wizard, "just as we have practiced." That meant smartly, with our arms at our sides and our chests proudly displaying our blue diamonds. Still disorientated and disillusioned, we lined up in our marching rows like sick little sergeants. The nurses flanked us, and the wizard took his usual position at the front. The older children marched at the back. It was our job to make sure that no child was left behind. The wizard gave the signal, and we began to march along the path lined with dead shrubs and saplings. There was an odd smell in the air, and the human soldiers put on their masks, which were monstrous contraptions, the things nightmares are made of. They were replete with night vision visors and a pipe snaking to their mouths, a bulletproof oxygen delivery system. We marched and marched and marched, the smell getting stronger. Our adrenaline pushed us forward. When children fell or fainted, we picked them up and carried them. Nurse 8 managed to carry a baby in a sling on her chest as well as a tot on her back. I put my shoulder under Salome's when she began weeping from exhaustion, and we hobbled along. My blisters burned my heels like hot coals. Kiki fell. I had to let Salome go so that I could pick her up. Despite my exhaustion, her body felt light. Her lips were white and dry. We kept marching. Finally, a huge wrought iron arch announced the name of our destination. It was a scary-looking sign, like one you would find at the entrance to a graveyard instead of a fancy new town or meadow. "Finally," said the wizard, "we made it." We all looked at him, half delirious from the struggle. The sign was in Sheng, so we couldn't read it. He took off his hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead and neck, then put it back on his head. "Welcome to Brightside," he said. If that was what a meadow looked like, I thought to myself, Then it was sorely disappointing. On the outskirts, the landscape was arid and the horizon beyond bristled with dead trees. There were people strewing ash in the fields, perhaps as fertilizer, but nothing was growing there. In front of us were squat concrete buildings. The tallest one was dome-shaped, cracked and speckled with smoke, a grey boiled egg. And there was nothing before us that looked remotely more attractive or hopeful than the orphan house. I could no longer see the soldiers' expressions beneath their masks, but I was certain they were smirking again. I tried to put the puzzle together in my head. The silver drones, the silver envelope, the shimmering silver soldiers who had gunned down my mother, an enemy of the Sheng state, in cold blood, leaving her lying in a bright puddle on our kitchen floor. The same floor we had swept white flour from after baking. The same tiles that Miller had crawled on when she was a baby, then taken her first unsteady steps. The kitchen floor that was now grouted with black blood, if it existed at all. We walked under the black-lettered archway and were soon at the largest of the ugly buildings. The one behind it belched the foul reek that permeated everything. A tall chimney that reached into the grey sky, constantly spewing the evil-smelling smoke. I almost stumbled, but recovered just in time to not drop Kiki. We streamed into a large courtyard which looked so bright and bleak at the same time that it overwhelmed the smaller children and they began to cry again. "It's all right," assured the wizard. "It's all right. You've all done so well. I am proud of you." Kiki was still in my arms, unconscious, her hair plastered to her forehead with perspiration, reminding me of Mouse after her afternoon naps. My arms were starting to shake. My muscles needed to rest, but I couldn't put Kiki down. I didn't want to put her down. The stink was terrible, and the grey snow fell on our shoulders and hair. There was a human soldier stationed at the entrance of the building. He was in Sheng military fatigues, not the shimmering uniform. I guessed he didn't need to be invisible here. The man shouted a command at us in Sheng, but I didn't understand. The size of the automatic rifle that hung from his shoulder conveyed all we needed to know. He switched to our home language, Ake. "Remove your clothes," he yelled. The orphans looked around, wondering if they had misheard. Were they all going to get new clothes now? I remembered dreaming of the new comfortable clothes that morning, but I could see by the nurses' expressions that there were no new clothes here. They were trying to hide their fear, but I could see it in their eyes. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to help the smallest children undress. The wizard removed his hat again, approaching the man proudly, but with humility. I slowly crept to the front of the crowd of children, staying on the sidelines. I wanted to hear what they were saying as they talked in hushed voices. "Let them wear their clothes," the wizard said. "Please." At first, the soldier in fatigues who had just barked at us looked angry. But then his face changed into one of recognition, then surprise. "Hey," he said, speaking Ake, his eyes lighting up. "You're that famous doctor." "Yes," said the wizard. "You saved my brother's life," he said, "at the children's hospital in Saja. You're the author of my favourite book." "I'm glad about your brother," the wizard said. The soldier seemed shocked at seeing the wizard. Then his body relaxed, losing the sharp angles of aggression. "Would you like a cigarette?" He opened a dented silver case and offered it to the wizard. It reminded me of the sugar bowl we used to have at home. "No," said the wizard, shaking his head. The soldier took out a hand-rolled cigarette for himself and snapped the box shut. "Let's go for drinks tonight." The soldier tapped the cigarette on the top of the case, then put it to his lips and lit it. "There's a place at the barracks that serves decent vodka. The food is edible, if you've got a strong constitution." The nurses had tears streaming down their cheeks, but they kept their faces as neutral as possible, not wanting to upset the children. I assumed, looking at the soldier's chafed rifle, that crying children got shot. "I'm going in with the children," said the wizard. The soldier looked like he had just been slapped. His mouth hung open, the cigarette sticking to his bottom lip. "You're what?" "I'm going in with the children." "What?" exclaimed the man. "They're Akeratan." "Could you please keep your voice down?" asked the wizard. "I don't want them to be scared." "They're orphans." "They're my children," the wizard said. "But," the man struck his own temple, "you were born Sheng. You don't need to go in there. You're crazy." The wizard gestured at the soldier to keep his voice down. He shook his head, his eyes rolling skyward. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His eyes darted up at the nurses and then back to the wizard. He tried one more time in a low tone. "There's a back door inside the chamber. I'll unlock it for you now. You can go inside with them, then leave quietly when they are not looking. No one will ever know. We'll be drinking vodka tonight. I'll buy you dinner." "Thank you," said the wizard. The soldier looked relieved. "So you'll meet me at the back?" "No, I'll stay with the children." I could see the soldier's jaw muscles working, chewing on his frustration. The wizard persisted. "Now, will you allow them to keep their clothes on?" The soldier's face hardened into a grimace. "It's a lot of extra work for us." I thought he was going to say no, but in the end, he dragged on his cigarette and nodded. "Fine." He looked at his watch and then tipped his head to indicate the open maw of the building. Tobacco smoke leaked out of his mouth. "But you better move it. The next group will be here soon." The nurses were weeping openly now as they shepherded the children through the doorway, shored up by the silver soldiers. The nurses didn't have blue diamonds on their chests or barcodes on their necks, so I don't think they were allowed in. The wizard seemed to be the only exception because he was famous and important. Nurse 8 took the baby she had been carrying in the sling on her perspiration-stained chest and passed him to the wizard, whose hands I saw tremble. As the wizard led us through the door, the barcode detector in the doorframe counted us, one after the other. Beep, beep, beep. There was nothing to look at, just a large room with some dull metal piping on the walls, like a communal shower. Were we supposed to shower? I wondered if that's why the soldier wanted us to take our clothes off. The floor was painted a toxic-looking green. Kiki was still unconscious, and I was glad. I didn't want her to be afraid. Benjamin attached himself to my right leg and didn't let go. The door slammed shut, and the seal was activated. My eyes met the wizard's. He gave me a fond look, not quite a smile. I nodded at him, as if we had an understanding, because it felt as if we did, even if I hadn't fully yet grasped the consequences. "Things will get better, Kitsune," I imagined him saying to me, his hand tenderly holding the barcode on the back of my neck. "They always do." It was hot with all of us crowded in the room like that, and the air was thick. The babies began to cry and then scream, which scared the tots, who started wailing too. I saw Jacko pick up a tot and hold him tight, swaying him, comforting him. I grasped my mother's locket and kissed it. "It's going to be okay," said the Wizard of Brightside, grasping a child's hand. He was holding the baby in one arm. There were some dull banging noises from outside of the room, then a hissing sound in the walls. He spoke loudly. "I want you to all take your lucky buttons out." The children did as instructed. I shifted Kiki's weight to my left hip so that I could access my frayed blazer pocket. My hands were shaking, but the sight of the bright yellow button made me feel better. The children nodded at the wizard, clutching their buttons, eyes shining with tears. "Now," he said, his voice calm and strong, "I have a secret to tell you." The whispering and wailing tapered off as we listened to what he had to say. "I am, in fact, a real wizard," he said, "and I'm going to show you my best magic trick." I bit my lip, watching him. holding on to Kiki while clutching my yellow button. Benjamin still glued to my leg. A strange chemical smell filled the chamber. Now, hold on to those buttons as tightly as you can, and think of the best place you can imagine in the world. If you wish hard enough, your lucky button will become a portal and you'll be magically transported to your own bright side. I thought of the pretty weeds the wizard had told me about. How you can blow the little seed feathers away into the breeze and make a wish. I looked down at my yellow button, then squeezed my fingers around it as hard as I could, and I made my wish. The gas started cascading down from the old pipes, swirling around us, and the children began coughing and falling. The buttons rolled from their upturned palms onto the green floor. Flowers in a meadow. Kiki stopped breathing. I began to lose the feeling in my body as I sensed my spirit drifting up and away into the mist. I didn't resist it, because, in the distance, I could see my parents walking hand in hand and a grinning apple-cheek Miller mouse on Mum's hip. The black emptiness in my stomach disappeared, and I felt light. One part of me hit the floor, and I saw the button rolling away from me as if in slow motion. It wheeled towards the wizard who had also fallen. While one part of me hit the hard floor, the other part slowly lifted and walked towards my family on the bright side. Walked so lightly that I became one with the whirling white gas.